Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor, and today we're going to be discussing the rupee, the exchange rate. The rupee has been falling for a while now. Is this alarming? Is this something that we should take note of? Is this something that we should just allow to carry on? To discuss all of this, we have with you Mr. Deepak Shenoy. He's the founder and CEO of Capitalmind, which is a leading portfolio management service, and Mr. Shenoy, of course, is a well known economist. People uh, follow him a lot for his advice and his insight on a lot of economic factors. So, thank you, Mr. Shenoy, for joining us.
Thanks, Sharad. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And so I'll start with the basic question. Do we need to be alarmed about the rupee, or is a lot of this just sensationalism and political rhetoric that's taken over?
I think it does make India poorer as a country if you see your currency depreciate because it means you can afford less things. Now, whether those things are Indian made or foreign made is not relevant, but it just means that your money just buys you a little bit less in the overall context of things. And therefore, your country gets poorer. So, yes, we should be worried that your currency depreciates, but India has a bigger problem in that we are a net importer, so we end up importing a lot of things, and because we import a lot of things, our import costs go up, and therefore our inflation goes up, and that makes things more expensive for us, which of course makes us poorer, and inflation is a tax, right? So effectively currency depreciation is a tax that we bear as part of living, and in general that would not be a problem, but in a particular situation like today or like nowadays when our economy is actually doing quite well and we're getting a lot of foreign inflows, we should not be depreciating quite as much, and the problem is not what is happening now, it is what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and but speaking of the last few years, the rupee has been depreciating for a long time now, and it's been quite a steady depreciation. Unless you look at a few periods, like say the 2004 to 2007 period, where it actually appreciated. But apart from that, the depreciation has been quite steady. So you feel that this period right now is more alarming than earlier, or it's not alarming, but we should be concerned about it more?
So, in general, if you look at the difference of inflation between us and the countries that we deal with, our inflation reports show something like 4.5%, 5%. In fact, core inflation is less than 4%. Um, Whereas the US is at about 2.5 to 3%. The differential of 2.5% is what you should depreciate by every year, roughly. But we've depreciated 2.5% in the last month, not the last year. So it's almost like you've got a sudden bout of depreciation. Of course, before this, the US inflation was even higher, sometimes higher than ours. We should have appreciated, but we actually depreciated because of the central bank in India, RBI. They participate in the forex market to force the rupee to depreciate
Right.
because on the excuse that we are building reserves, we don't need these reserves as much as we might be told that we need them, but more importantly that when the rupee depreciates, it's because, let us say, foreign investors are pulling their money out. The RBI is required or should be required to say, listen, if you bought when they came in, you should be selling on the way out, and you should be selling heavily. We don't sell heavily, and therefore the rupee depreciates, but it doesn't appreciate because they buy heavily when the money comes in. So
Right.
and the RBI can buy endlessly, right? You can keep buying dollars and printing rupees because it has the ability to print rupees. So you have a problem right now because dollars are going out and they're not selling enough, and they should be selling a lot.
You're saying that the RBI should be selling even more dollars than it has been, because the
Yes,
numbers show it's sold about 60 billion, 60 to 70 billion over just the last few months.
they bought about $100 billion in the last 2 years. So why shouldn't they sell most of it? The amount of outflows that you have been seeing, we did see this kind of outflow in the past, but that time the RBI did sell. and therefore the rupee was more stable. Now they've suddenly decided not to sell, which is strange because we should be allowing the rupee to appreciate as well. If you're letting it go on the downside, you should let it go on the upside. Let it become 60, 65 rupees when flows come in. When flows come in, the more than $100 billion of flows came in the last 4 years also. So mostly, we've seen 100 billion of flows, then 100 billion of outflows, 100 billion more flows, and so on. But we've of this net 100 billion, 220 billion dollars that has come in from abroad. We in the last 4 years, from Jan 2020 to September 2024, we have at some level found that the RBI has only bought dollars to make the rupee depreciate. So in general, if you look at the contextual understanding here, you actually, if you look at a market, if there's a supply of dollars that is greater than the demand for dollars,
Right.
then you should see that the dollar price should fall, because that means there's more supply of dollars and demand for the rupee, right? So if you have from 2020 to 2024, $220 billion coming from FPI, NRI deposits, and all that. But our net outflows, exports or imports minus exports minus whatever else, remittances and all that, is just $120 billion. We've actually net received $120 billion extra uh, over the last 4 years. But the RBI has not just bought that; they bought even more than that in order to force the rupee to go from 70 to 84. It was 70 rupees to a dollar in 2020 January. Today it's 84 or 86 or something, and that depreciation has happened despite all these record flows coming in. So essentially, the RBI has at every point in time, when the rupee depreciates, let it depreciate. But if as soon as money comes in that makes it appreciate, they come in and say we'll buy. So
So
effective,
why would the RBI want the rupee to
there are,
depreciate, and then why would it
yeah,
be stepping in right now to kind of slow the depreciation when it's happening?
it should be. I mean, it's doing it, but it's not doing enough of it. That's my problem. But the point over here is rupee reserves dollar reserves in India have largely been maligned by a lot of wrong metrics. For instance, we say we should have 12 months of imports or 6 months of imports. And when they say imports, what do they really mean? They mean goods, merchandise imports.
Right.
There are three problems with this. First, you do not need 12 months of goods imports, because this is a doomsday scenario where you're saying everything else shuts down. We have zero exports, and therefore we need all these imports and we need to cover 12 months of them. Are we out of our minds? Because if you shut down all the exports, you won't need half of these imports. We import crude, refine them into petroleum, sell them out. We import diamonds, raw diamonds, convert them into jewelry or polished diamonds and send them out. So if you don't have any exports, you will not have half of these imports. That's number one. Second, a lot of the exports that we have, and we export people and we export services. The people and services that we export brings us back remittances, brings us back services revenue. This added up is $250 billion a year. Just this is greater than almost all of the other items that you see. So what happens really is, if you look at goods imports and minus the services imports, and you take the current account deficit as a whole, last year, last 12 months, it's only $25 billion deficit. We have $600 billion. So, assuming even a $50 billion deficit, which is roughly the average of the last 10 years, a $50 billion deficit can be financed for 12 years with $600 billion. And we have more than $600 billion after this 50 or $60 billion of selling that you're talking about. So,
Right.
if they
It's
sold another
630.
200 billion, I don't think we would have a problem. I mean, we would, that's just basically the current account deficit. There's other metrics. For instance, they say there's a real and effective exchange rate. How do you calculate the exchange rate? You say the difference between the inflation of one country versus the other should reflect in the exchange rate differences. So what do? They take the exports and imports in goods only to get to this
Right.
number. But they don't take services. Now, if we took services, we would be exporting to the UK or to the US, where inflation is 3 or 4%.
Hmm.
So our inflation differential is much smaller. Therefore, our currency differential should not be as much. But we import mostly from China goods, and Chinese inflation is 0.5% right now. So the difference looks very large if you look only at goods, but if you look at services, the difference narrows down considerably. So they will say that we are overvalued when you look at a goods based exchange rate
I
inflation
see.
differential. But if you look goods and services, there is no problem at all in overall. If I see, I mean, we haven't calculated the numbers because they won't allow us to. But if you were able to calculate these, and it's not difficult. RBI has all the data of which country receives we receive money from for which services and all that stuff. They're able to get these numbers and they can actually calculate it. It would not be meaningfully higher if you calculate it over the last 10-year period. And
Which means that
therefore,
the rupee is not currently overvalued, is what your
exactly,
argument.
I think the rupee is terribly undervalued, considering that we have all these other inputs in play, and therefore we should, and we don't allow it to appreciate. We should allow it to appreciate with flows, but we don't allow it to appreciate because if you allow it to appreciate with flows, then if it had gone to 70 rupees, now it will come back to 85. That's fine according to me. You can go to
Right.
70, come back to 85. You be more volatile. But if there's somebody else who's being the my bap of this whole thing, which is I will tell you exactly how much the rupee should be at, that distorts markets, right? And that's not the way you're supposed to do things by saying, oh, we cannot have the rupee appreciate, but we should have it depreciate. I understand. The third metric is, oh, what about our neighboring countries and we have to compete with them? We absolutely should not be having this philosophy because we succeed in services just whether we appreciate or depreciate. We
Right.
succeed in because services revenues are from IT, and IT, if you see a big decline in the rupee, the other side of the trade, which is your customer, is going to look at you and say, listen, you just made so much more money because the rupee depreciated, give me half of it. So you don't make as much. Secondly, you're required to hedge certain amount of inflows and outflows anyways if you have a borrowing. So therefore you're hedged in that context. The third one is that the rupee depreciation does not translate naturally in any other case, in many other cases where we import something and then refine it and export it, because if the rupee depreciates, your import cost goes up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like you make a lot more money because you're paying more for the imports and more for the and getting more for the exports. It's the margins that have just marginally changed or increased for you. I don't think, and remember, we're a net importer. So why would we therefore hurt ourselves by saying we should promote our exports by depreciating the rupee? Don't do that. Instead, make stuff that people want. We have services. We are not the cheapest services country across the world, but people still come to us simply because they want our services. They want the stuff, that the fact that we have good, great processes, large teams, people that speak English. This stuff makes people want us more than, for instance, outsourcing it to some other place. A lot of other countries have tried, but they haven't come close to our service delivery capability. We should do that in goods as well. Sell stuff that people want, and people will buy it regardless of whether you have a higher or lower exchange rate, and that makes you competitive, right? So you don't have to be competitive in iron and steel. We should
Yeah.
manufacture iron and steel for ourselves and maybe put tariffs so that other people can't undercut our costs. We do that with agriculture, we should do it with steel and all that.
Mhm.
But we should not absolutely do something that says we want to hurt the entire country so that a few exporters can be more positive, and they're not even being more positive because their customers are saying whatever depreciation is there, please give us half of it. So it's a wasted case even for trade to try and say we will compete with other countries when we're trying to depreciate. We just do not have the capability of competing with them at a commodity level. We have never been able to compete at a commodity level. We will only be able to compete at a level that is beyond commodities, where it's more specialty in nature. So people will come and buy up. We do that for pharma, for instance. We're one of the largest pharma exporters in the world, and the rupee exports or imports don't change meaningfully for these companies simply because the rupee depreciates, because they have processes and factories which create products that people want regardless of the price. The price
Right.
can change, here and there. So I think we are living in a very dated system of metrics. We should change those metrics, and then automatically it'll seem like, oh, the rupee appreciating is not such a bad thing.
So this though turns on its head what most of the people are talking about right now, where the overwhelming discourse seems to be that, oh, depreciation is a bad thing. And well, one is that the rupee is depreciating too much, and that the RBI is it's spending too much money in trying to stop this depreciation. That's one. And two, everybody is talking about the rupee being overvalued. So on both those cases, you're saying that they're wrong, that actually the RBI is not doing enough to stop the depreciation.
Let me correct you there in only one concept. I believe that if you stop the rupee from appreciating, you should stop it from depreciating. You are not allowed as a central bank to say that you can determine what the exchange rate is like in what should be a free market economy of that sort. So
Right.
therefore, if you do that on the upside, please do this on the downside. Protect us both from appreciation and depreciation. Don't only allow us to depreciate. Otherwise, go free. Let the rupee appreciate all the way till 65. Let it depreciate all the way to 95. Let the market forces determine that. Why do you have to intervene and build those reserves? You build your reserves as a multiple of the current account deficit, which is about $50 billion, maybe 5 years of that or 6 years of that. Anything beyond that is not required. You don't need to participate to stabilize the rupee, because every time you say that you participate to stabilize the rupee, the only stabilization that happens is when dollars come in. When they go out, you refuse to participate to stabilize the rupee. Not enough. So I would say the RBI needs to take this as feedback that this is not something that you can play only one way. We need either an open market. And you know what, it's time for us to free the rupee. It's time for us to free a lot of things, a lot of the currency itself. So my
Absolutely.
funda is not that the RBI should do more. The RBI should do more only because it did more on the other direction when dollars came in. If it chooses to that this be the time that they let it go freely, I am all with them as long as they don't try to participate and try to build reserves back on the way up. We have too many reserves. We should keep these reserves much lower. Our central bank balance sheet is one of the largest balance sheets in the world in comparison with our GDP, despite all the QE that's happening everywhere. And I believe that this is actually a bad time to actually try to say, okay, we'll let it free, because I've only seen this, let the market forces determine it when the rupee is depreciating. I don't see this argument when the rupee is appreciating, when dollars are coming in. You don't say that, oh well, just because Reliance Industries was able to get say $10 billion worth of investments, the rupee should go to 80. It doesn't, because all this money comes in and then RBI absorbs all of it. So
Buys it
you
all up.
should absolutely have an appreciation and depreciation, and it's time for that. But short of that, when you're not actually saying that I'm going to keep it free, then you should participate in both directions.
Right. And so now, do you feel that this is just a kind of a flawed thinking amongst our policymakers, where they seem to have some sort of target for the rupee and some sort of target for forex reserves, which is possibly higher than we actually need?
Yeah, I mean, like I made, the argument is like clearly like, why do you need so much? You can always keep saying I need money in reserve. It's like people saving money. If I'll save money for my for buying a car, and I save 5 crores, and I actually want to buy a 25 lakh car. Like
Right.
really, I mean, you're going to deny yourself a good life because you are you want to be, what you really need is much less than what you already saved. So you got your reserves. You got enough reserves for 6 to 10 years, or even 5 6 years of current account deficits will be only 250 to $300,000. Now you could actually say, listen, we can actually build more reserves by allowing our domestic citizens to invest abroad through mutual funds. Let us say, then the mutual
Right.
funds can go buy. Their limits are 8 billion, just $8 billion. Make it 100 billion, right? So let $100 billion be held by Indian citizens through mutual funds abroad. If there is a crisis, you can always bring that money back, force them to sell and bring the money back. That's not a problem. That would be a super crazy crisis. But then the people hold that money, not the RBI.
Central bank. Yeah. So, I mean, then is there uh, my next question would be that one of the factors leading to the rupee's weakness right now is that the FIIs are pulling their money out of India right now, and it's a lot of it is flowing to the US. So, do you feel that this is a more a push factor from India, or is it a pull factor from the US?
I it doesn't matter really. The reasons why rupee goes out, foreign investors go out. Now remember, they how much have they sold this month? Now we keep talking about this as if it's a big thing.
Hmm.
But in January alone, how much have foreign investors sold so far? 23,600 crores.
Right.
This is nothing compared to an 80,000 crore month that we saw earlier, or a 50,000 crore. We didn't depreciate so much in an 80,000 crore month. That's and 23,000 crores is $4 billion, $3 billion today. Are we saying that $3 billion worth of outflows has caused the rupee to fall by 2.5%? That is ridiculous. We have $600 billion of reserves, and if those reserves are invested in assets which yield 4%, 4%. I'm saying if the RBI has put it into US treasury bills, they're yielding roughly 4.5% a year right now, right? So if you have a $600 billion kitty that's invested that's yielding 4%, I'm just giving you an example. It's not invested in US government securities, and also a good portion of this is gold. But I'm telling you the example of what I mean. $600 billion invested at 4% is roughly what 4.5% is about $27 billion a year. That is about $2.25 billion a month in interest alone. Are we saying that if we are earning $2.25 billion a month alone, FII selling $3 billion is going to cause our currency to crash by 3%? We are out of our minds. This is just, I mean, this is the numbers just don't add up or make sense.
So then, why is the rupee depreciating?
I think the rupee is depreciating because the RBI is not doing enough, because they did enough to see. What happens is the RBI controls almost all the dollars that India owns. It doesn't allow other people to own dollars like meaningfully, right? You and I can't own dollars in a US bank without breaking loose.
Right.
So I was assuming you're not an NRI at all. That we can store something, maybe a million, maybe 5 million, 10 million. Minute we start owning a truckload of dollars, we have problems in that, they will be saying that, oh, how did you get this money out, and why did you bring it back in, and all that shit. So I think that if you consider the overall ownership of dollars in the system, most of it is owned by the central bank. So when people come in and say, I want, or people want to go out and they say, I want dollars, who else will you go to? The central bank has to participate. But nobody else is allowed to own that meaningful amount of dollars. So at some level, the central bank has to participate. If you were allowed to have dollars more meaningfully, you would have actual capital account convertibility of some sort. Then the banks could own significantly higher amounts of dollars, and the market could themselves then meet all these demands. And it's only 3 billion. I'm talking about just $3 billion, and this is causing us to cripple down as if the whole world has come to an end. It doesn't somehow make sense that banks don't even have $3 billion to pay, but the banks themselves are like, listen, it's always been the RBI that's participated, so they'll participate. If they don't want to participate, we don't have enough to this thing. So there is no meaningful market that has been created without the presence of the RBI itself. When we don't have a market of that size, the RBI participation determines whether you appreciate or depreciate. So you've created an environment where your participation determines the movement of the rupee. I'll tell you how this happens. At 4:50 in the evening, SBI, some dealer in the forex market, will get an order saying RBI wants to buy so many dollars or sell so many dollars. At 4:50, the market closes at 5. You don't have any time to react. Nobody else has time to react, right? So there's no like meaningful. RBI is the regulator of the market, and RBI is a participant in the market. This sounds, unnecessarily over,
Regulate.
regulate or participated in that sense. You should have different agencies to do these two things, but we have the same regulator, and we have. So when they put in the order at 4:50, there will be this sudden flurry of activity, and the rupee dollar rate could change based on this. If they do things like this, it's not a real market. Of course, it could be large players also. For instance, a George Soros can come. I don't think George Soros has as much money to be able to manipulate the rupee as much as he could have maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But
Right.
let's assume a big player came in, and that player's name was George Soros. And then, yeah, then you would have this problem of, oh, listen, we can't have one player dominating the market. And then we would
But
all
to
be
do
going up against. But the RBI is there. It's the George
right,
Soros, of India. We don't need a George Soros because your own central bank is trying to undermine your currency, right? So at some level, we have this as as, and I don't think it's malintention. It isn't like they want to hurt our country. It's that they have been driven by the wrong metrics, and they don't see it the way I do, because I think what I've done is I've gone back to first principles rather than looked at this age old, like this REER is some age old thing.
right.
Uh, People have done it all the time. Britain has evolved and said, listen, we will use services as well in our REER calculations. RBI has seen this. RBI said, oh, we know that Britain is doing this, but guess what? We won't do it. For reasons beyond explanation. They have not explained why they won't do it. They just use the word, nevertheless, we are doing this. So
I
it
see.
sounds like, listen, you're not willing to learn, because at least if you had done it, you would have given me an alternative and said, oh, we did it with the services method, we did it with the only goods method, and we find that the differences are not meaningful. If you had done that, I would have admitted and agreed that, okay, you can use any one of them. But if you tell me that you're not even going to consider it, then it's a problem, because that's just a mindset issue. It's not malintentioned. I think it is at some level an unwillingness to change, and to stick to philosophies that have perhaps become outdated because the world has changed. And therefore we should be more cognizant of it. If you allow a free market, in 2 years the rupee will have appreciated 15-20%. I
You
mean,
feel so?
I feel so, because India is a very rapidly growing country. It's one of the countries that will attract investment from around the globe. If that investment were to come in and the
Hmm.
RBI were not to buy it, the rupee will appreciate,
I
because
see.
the demand of rupees will be higher than the supply of rupees, or higher than the demand of dollars. When you
Right.
bring dollars, you're asking, giving me dollars and say, give me rupees instead. If you keep on bringing me dollars, I'll just keep giving you less rupees for each time, because the demand is so high. It's like, if if there is something heavily in demand, its price goes up.
Of course. Right.
So if you kept, and by the way, this is true for any 5 year period in Indian history after 1992, maybe 1992 ke baad a little bit. I don't have data between for a few years, but after 2000 at least, any 5 year period, portfolio and direct investment inflows from outside the country have been greater than the current account deficits added up, for most of it. So that means the demand for Indian rupees, whether it is for investment or not. Now, how do you know what is investment, what is not? I'll give you an example. Amazon has an India subsidiary. Amazon's India subsidiary loses money, or to the order of maybe 6 to 10,000 crores a year.
Right.
Now, Amazon sends in money, but it doesn't send this money as a as a trade. It does not say the Indian subsidiary is now charging Amazon for some service that it is providing. It
Right.
says no, Indian company is actually going to sell Indian stuff, but it's losing money. It's fine. So what I will do is I will invest money in that company. So every year I transfer $1 billion or $2 billion into the Indian subsidiary so that it can make good its losses. How does this classify? It's classified as direct investment. However, the
Absolutely.
money was trying to be lost. It was not, because they know they're losing money. They're probably going to lose money for another 5 or 10 years. They believe that they will at some point. Yeah, they could list it, they could take it public, they could make it profitable, all that stuff. But that is another time. If you look at investment flows, foreign investors already own roughly $1 trillion worth of market cap of just Indian companies today, listed Indian companies. We don't have $1 trillion. So therefore, what reserves are we talking about? We could build $1 trillion. We'd just be able to pay back people who have invested in the public financial markets their money back. And then there's debt. So there's a bunch of people who have given us debt. So we'll add another 500. We could keep on going and say, if you want to cover all the bases, you would need more reserves. You don't cover all the bases. The idea is you cover only enough to assume a working economy and then move it forward. And then if you have a non-working economy, you don't need to pay anybody back, because
Absolutely.
isn't working. Tell them, sorry, there's no dollars. I mean, if you have, like, what did Russia do? Russia didn't say, I'll pay you dollars despite my dollars being sequestered by America. They just shut down these American running businesses in Russia and said, boss, you're done. You guys stole my dollars. I will steal your companies which have come to me, and I'm done. I'm not going to deal with you guys anymore. That is exactly what will happen in an extreme crisis. That is the solution for the extreme crisis. You don't need this level of dollar reserves to be able to be done. What's the point of these dollar reserves? Tomorrow we have a skirmish with Pakistan, and America says, "Oh well, we'll freeze all your dollars." What are you going to do with that? You're creating a world, you're in a world order where people like you require to be a lot more, lot less sensational in terms of activity, and therefore a lot, your reserves should be therefore isolated from political actions more and more. Instead, so therefore you're getting the opportunity to reduce your dollar reserves, reduce them. At a later point, you can buy gold, you can buy something else when things come. So that, I think that may be a better solution or better way to look at things. However, I feel that the traditional mechanism of what RBI is has been using to determine whether the rupee is higher or lower than it should be, these things are wrong. And it's a problem of power. We have given them that power. At some point, it's
And
difficult for them to give it up. So the only way that anything will change is when we take it back. When I say we, it is we, the people of India, through our politically appointed representatives, will have to curb down the extreme powers that have been given to RBI to do something like this by freeing it up. You have to actually repeal FEMA for RBI to not take such actions,
I
because
understand.
FEMA is what, yeah. So we have to. I mean, we have to go to that level, but I think baby steps will help.
Okay, but on that note, this has been an absolutely fascinating discussion. You've turned the broader rhetoric completely on its head. What everybody's saying, you've been saying the opposite in a very convincing manner, I must say. So, thank you so much for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thanks, Sharad. It was good to be here. Thank you.